Welcome to Perspectives On, where we're giving the world a voice. We are a faith-based social justice forum where individuals give their perspectives on various topics. It's an opportunity to express their viewpoint, their stance, and their angle on justice issues affecting the community and globally. Each episode features guests presenting their perspective on things like climate change, the church, urban farming, and food insecurity, all through a unique faith lens. Come check us out. Give us your perspective. Welcome to Perspectives on Social Justice. I am Lairalaine White, your host. And I just wanted to remind everyone that our social justice platform serves as a forum addressing issues that affect our communities. So once a month, we dedicate a conversation on matters relating to climate. Though I do not profess to necessarily be being an expert on climate, I do enlist the talents of those who are some players in the game that can shed light on these issues. So tonight we talk about climate and its effect on mental health. And as you know, scientists have long known that about the potentiality of devastating mental health conditions arising from the combination of both genes and environmental factors. A 2016 report from the American Psychological Association found that our climate crisis, exposure to climate and weather-related natural disasters, can result in mental health consequences such as anxiety, depression, post-traumatic stress disorder. And during this crisis affecting the southwestern portion of our country in particular, some people are at higher risk for mental health consequences, from weather-related disasters. Among them are children, the pregnant women, postpartum women, people with existing mental health issues, people who are economically disadvantaged, those who are homeless, and even our first responders. So tonight we examine some of the factors and we answer the questions of how we can love our environment while braving the side effects of this crisis we have relating to the environment. And I have two key players in the crisis or in the fight to advocate for relief from the crisis on tonight. And so I'm going to start out. We have Dr. Nataki Osborne Jelks, and she is going to. Oh, wrong person. Well, this might be a sign, but that's okay. You're not off the hook, Dr. Jelks. You're gonna go first. I'm bound and determined to let you go first. Why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself and tell us about tell the world about who you are.
And I hate going first, so I just knew that this was going to be our chance.
That was a mistake. I've been to put first, but that's okay. We're gonna still go with it. Come on.
All right, we'll go with it. So thank you so much, Reverend Dr. White, for having me on this evening. My name is Nataki Osborne Jelks. I am the co-founder of the West Atlanta Watershed Alliance, otherwise known as WAWA, and I'm also an assistant professor in the Environmental and Health Sciences program at Spelman College.
Awesome. And we also have the esteemed Valerie Rawls. Valerie, tell us about yourself.
Well, good evening, Reverend Dr. White. Thank you for having me as well. I am Valerie Rawls. I am the co-founder of the Eco Women's Institute, and I'm also the founder of Hill Eco Inc. And it is truly a pleasure to be here with both of you ladies tonight. And thank you for having me.
Of course. Like I say, I'm the one wwho is privileged to be with both of you. We're gonna go right into our discussion about mental health as it pertains to this climate crisis. Have you personally seen or can you just speak to just a little bit about how this climate crisis has affected mental health, even especially those around you, if you've seen that? Either one. Just jump right in. This is a dialogue.
Well, I think for us all publicly for the first time to see it and even to hear the words climate refugees used here in the United States was Katrina. I mean, we've seen isolated incidents, but we hadn't seen anything on that scale before. And I think we didn't take into consideration the after effects of people having to be uprooted and moved to different places. When you talk about climate change from a global perspective and the trauma that it takes, when you look at the refugee camps in Syria, we have a tendency to use the word climate change and it's global and it's out there. But when you look at environmental justice and you look at the people who look like us who are disproportionately affected, to me, that's environmental justice, and climate change has to take a back seat in language only, but it's how I perceive it when I talk about it.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And what about you, Dr. Jelks?
Yeah, I would agree with what my sister Valerie just said. As we think about, I think Hurricane Katrina definitely is a strong sort of marker, if you will, to really seeing that widespread devastation, and understanding that, even though we think of hurricanes as these natural disasters, what we know about climate change is that it can cause these unnatural disasters that are, of our making in terms of, lots of human activities, our, reliance on fossil fuels and that sort of thing. And so what I have, what I do come to understand is that even though people may not directly link what they're experiencing to things like climate change, we know that the underlying conditions that we see and experience in our communities with pollution day in and day out, compounded by poverty in a lot of Black and brown communities. And, this, the way that our environments are treated, by industry, by companies, that pollute, that, these are the things that take tolls on people. So you have that trauma associated with those big events like a Hurricane Katrina, but there's also this trauma associated with these everyday life experiences, in communities that are underinvested in terms of the infrastructure, that are dumped on, that don't have the resources that they need to promote, healthy, whole livelihoods.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Haiti is a good example of, especially when we talk about hurricanes. But I mean, we can get a little closer to home than that, and think about what's going on over in, for example, Texas and Louisiana today.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, people, because the capacity, because the electrical did not the electrical power grid did not have the capacity to weather the storm. You have a lot of people who do not have power. They're on a boiling water advisory, but a lot of them, because they don't have electricity, they can't boil the water. So there's a lot that comes, I would imagine there will be a lot of trauma associated, and people are probably going through some level of post-traumatic stress disorder because they've had that experience from Hurricane Katrina. You see, so it's very evident about how the environment impacts what we're doing environmental. I mean, I'm sorry, our mental state. So what does it mean then how is it that we can love our environment, even though the environment doesn't seem to be very kind to us right now and during this time? What are how do we do this? How can we affect things on both a personal as well as a policy level? What can the individual do? And again, on the policy level as well as the personal level.
So I guess maybe I'll start this time. As we think about, this idea of loving your environment, I think, and being kind to it, The first thing I think that we have to understand and to realize is that our environment is all around us. It is what we consider to be ubiquitous. We can't get away from it. And so the environment impacts us and our quality of life. So what we do to it, in fact, can and does have an impact on us. So I think we've got to understand that first, that our personal actions can have some reactions from the environment that may not be as kind to us because we're not being kind to it. And so I think that when we, talk about what we can do, there are things that we can do as individuals. There are things that we have to do on a policy level to advocate for the types of policies and solutions that would ensure that, Black and brown communities, that low income communities are not the dumping grounds for toxic and hazardous waste. That is very important.
Yeah.
Today we still have issues and challenges, with people just having access to basic amenities like clean water and sanitation. And all of this is linked. It's all kind of linked up together. And so while there is something that we can do in terms of our personal responsibility, just how we utilize resources on a daily basis, we've also got to make sure that we are holding elected officials accountable to enact the policies that we need to clean up our communities, to roll back some of the changes, if you will, that were made during the last presidential administration to kind of, we need to roll back some of the rollbacks on environmental protections. And we need to obey the science and look at what the science is telling us about solutions to things like climate change.
Right.
I'd like to go back to what you had stated about the infrastructure issue that they're seeing right now in Texas. When you talk about infrastructure, and particularly our communities of color inherit old things, and we have old infrastructure. And so that old infrastructure creates problems for us in our communities. For example, when you look at water, runoff for water, and the lack of zoning, the inability to navigate a community that has a lot of trucks moving through because of policies around where transportation abounds. So when I think about the issues that our communities face, environmental justice is affordable housing, lack thereof, education, lack thereof, public safety, lack thereof, health and human services, lack thereof.
Yeah.
So when you have to start to look at our communities, and I agree with my dear sister wholeheartedly, that we also have to look at the systemic racism. So if you start to look at a community that had white flight, so all the resources left, you have retail leakage, you have economic gaps, you have gaps in our communities that are created by systemic racism. Let's call it what it is. Gentrification is the great-great-grandchild of redlining. So we have all of these other moving parts around policy that affect the day-to-day lives of people, that create the stress, the trauma, and the lack of healthy communities create unhealthy people. So I think and when you know that you're a part of the ecosystem, education is critical. I don't think we speak enough about, we talk about the disparities and the disproportionate effects, but we don't talk about what our role and responsibilities are as individuals and how we can address these issues collectively either. So I think education for me, and addressing some of the policies, and civic engagement. I mean, how civically you are engaged are you in your community to address some of those policies that we need to have rolled back, as my dear sister so eloquently stated.
Yeah, absolutely. I like what you guys are saying. That's some good stuff. So given that, with respect to the notion of environmental justice, now, Ms. Rawls, you said a lot about how people of these disproportionate communities inherit old things. And so that takes us into our conversation with environmental justice. What immediate actions need to take place to mitigate climate change? And you may have already answered that question, but especially in the wake of what the new presidential administration is doing, especially when it comes to the climate crisis. What else can we do with respect to environmental justice in the Black communities? What can they do to just start the conversation, to get things moving? Either one.
I think the faith-based sector has to play a critical role in learning and also disseminate what they learn. And we have an opportunity through our faith-based sector because it's the hub of the community. It has been. It's an asset that unfortunately over time hasn't been utilized the way it has historically. It was a trusted advisor. It was access to information that was normally not even available to us, but we could at least get it there. It was communal. We did it together. And it was about where we all lived, work, play, and learn in the beloved community. Yeah. So if for me, quite frankly, that's what seats my work, is to ensure that I'm doing it from a stewardship perspective, which is eco-spirituality. I'm doing it from a justice perspective, which has to do with policy. And then I'm doing it through a lens of ethics. How ethical and moral are the decisions that are being made, and on the behalf of others? How can I sit at a table, and if I hear a decision being made that's going to have ramifications that aren't going to be positive for the whole, then I don't want to participate in that, because I'm going to fight for justice and equitable distribution of resources. So I think if we really start to see this where we get our spirituality and to understand that we have a role to play, as my dear sister said before, then that for me is, I think, the best place to start looking at a truly underutilized resource, which is our church.
Yeah, I would have to, I wasn't thinking about the church initially when the question was asked, but after hearing Ms. Rawls' response, I really have to, I just have to wholeheartedly agree with that. When we think about, the church as this anchor institution, I mean, this is the place, where the work has to happen, where the education has to happen. And there, are a number of churches who are starting to do that now. And it's so critically important. I think about my own church. My husband is the pastor of Mount Tabor Baptist Church in Columbus, Georgia. We live in Atlanta, but the church is in Columbus. And so he has had me from time to time, to talk about these issues. And it always amazes me how interested, the congregation is mostly an older, congregation. We do have some young people, but a lot of older people as well. And they are so into it, so interested, wanting to know what they can do. We've recently, started, bought some property across the street from the church, and we are starting our first garden, and we'll be, helping to feed that community. And so we're connecting those dots between, even our food and climate change and environmental protection. And so, I mean, really, the church is the perfect place for this to happen. But it can also happen, in our schools, if we have that political will to make sure that our children, are taught effectively. There are community-based organizations like the West Atlanta Watershed Alliance that are doing that are making sure that we are educating people from K to grade. So we start with the little ones and taking on up through, our seniors. And so there are these, critical, there's the critical education around earth systems, around what the earth provides for us, what it does for us. And the more that we know about that, the more that we understand what the impacts are when we, kind of collectively, don't treat our planet the way it should be treated. And that also can help us to come to, those solutions that are springing up from communities, from churches, from the grassroots to address many of these issues.
Right. And so what advice can you give as we get ready to close out? What advice can you give to church leaders, okay, or leaders of faith-based organizations, not just churches, but leaders of faith-based organizations and nonprofits that want to do some of the things that the two of you have talked about? What can they do first? Like how can they start their game plan or their strategy? Where should they start in engaging in trying to mitigate some of these impacts, especially when it comes to mental health?
Every church has a bulletin that has a list of folks on the prayer list, right?
Right.
And if you take a look at those issues of the people on that prayer list, those are social determinants of health. 9 times out of 10, they have some type of environmental issue that has created that a problem for them. Lack of access of healthy food, inability to get exercise, clean air, clean water. So I think the first thing that we need to do is to help our leaders in public, private, faith-based, grassroots sectors understand their role to become informed and to share the information that they have. One of the things that we're doing right now, and I love how from K to Gray, the Eco Womenist Institute, we have a Moms and Me Nature program. And to your point, we're starting with children and their mothers, because now this is something that they can transfer to their children. They can share, do some things in the house together to start using recyclable papers and bags and all those things you could do, right? Changing the light bulbs in the house, that low-hanging fruit. But I think when you start to look at institutions that need to bake into their ministry, social justice, environmental justice, it's about educating yourself and transferring that knowledge to the people that you're responsible for.
I would agree with that, that education is so critical, it's so important. And I might suggest that, just like churches have, Black churches have historically, gotten engaged with organizations like the NAACP and supported, institutions like that. I think that churches, would do well to look for those grassroots environmental justice or people of color-led environmental organizations in their communities. Tap into those resources. These organizations can be a source of education. They can connect, the church to the issues that are happening on the ground. In many cases, the church is aware of some of these things, but maybe has not connected these issues as environmental issues. And so I think there is a lot to be gained from joining forces with those types of organizations to help inform what can be done from a ministry perspective.
Absolutely, I agree with that wholeheartedly. And most people that regularly watch this show know that I tend to be very critical of the church's involvement. Not speaking necessarily denominationally, but the church universally, when it comes to issues of social justice issues. We don't have the same momentum as a movement that we had during the civil rights movement.
Right.
And so we need to assume that position. And I would say also, to add to what you guys are saying, that more and I know we in this country we had this thing about separation of church and state, but more of our leading pastors especially need to run for public office. I think that is the best way for us to engage in the work of social justice in a more constructive way than what we've been seeing, especially during 2020, during this environment of racial unrest. And so those are some, that's just, that's my commentary on the church and the church's involvement. And finally, it was very interesting to me today that the governor of Texas, Governor Greg Abbott, in his defense of what's going on with the lack of power, lack of electricity in the power grid, chose to blame the Green New Deal and its I guess his rationale for what's going on the power grid. I'm interested in getting your feedback on that. I thought it was absurd, but I'm interested in getting y'all's feedback on that. Anybody? I mean, y'all can just act like pretend like we're at lunch and we're just talking, just as girlfriends. Just go ahead and say it.
Girl, you know that man just trying to divert the fact that they know that he knows that he has a utility company providing 95% of their utilities. And also he knows that it isn't just about the Green New Deal. It's another gaslighting methodology to deflect from what they have not done for the people in that community. And we see that the people that are brown, that look like us, who live in communities that have poor infrastructure to begin with, their grid was shaky before it even went down for everybody else. So now the beauty of it, the sad thing that happens with environmental impacts, and I know my dear sister agree with me, there's this false nomer that it's just going to happen to them. No, boo-boo, you on the grid too.
Right.
So I'm sorry, when the light go down in Pookie and Roddy's in the neighborhood, bam, it's going to hit you too, since we're sitting at lunch.
Right. Come on, Dr. Jelks, what you got to say, girlfriend?
I mean, I can't even follow that. What I will say is that, as was already said, these are issues that impact everybody. Now, the tragedy is, however, that we are impacted oftentimes first and worst. So that's still something, to think about. As I think about, just climate change, we're all in the same storm, but we're not all in the same boat. And so that's why you see, there's widespread devastation, but, we are just hit. We're hit so much more disproportionately than other groups, and so we've got to remember that, and that has got to fuel us to work on the policy level, to work on the individual level, to work in our churches, in our communities, however we can try to address these issues. The challenge is before us.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you, ladies, for your commentary. Thank you for your perspectives. And thank you for the work that you guys are doing in the realm of this climate crisis and environmental justice. I am deeply appreciated and deeply honored that you have joined us today. And my audience is in a position to, like a sponge, just soaking up everything that is being put out. So I appreciate your candor. I appreciate you being my girlfriends for this last half an hour, and we will probably have you back if the world has not obligated you yet for Earth Day in April. We'll probably have a lot more to talk about for our Earth Day segment. But as we leave this broadcast, I leave you with those famous words of the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., that whatever affects us individually, whatever affects one, affects us all. Whatever affects one directly, affects us all indirectly. So good night, everyone. On next week, our farmers will be back in the house, and we have some great things to talk about with regard to food, farming, and food justice. Good night, everyone. Welcome to Perspectives On, where we're giving the world a voice. We are a faith-based social justice forum where individuals give their perspectives on various topics. It's an opportunity to express their viewpoint, their stance, and their angle on justice issues affecting the community and globally. Each episode features guests presenting their perspective on things like climate change, the church, urban farming, and food insecurity, all through a unique faith lens. Come check us out. Give us your perspective.